And here we are. Okay, good afternoon, friends, family, life remodelers, everybody tuning in on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn. My name's Chris Lambert. I'm the founder and CEO of Life Remodeled. We exist to bridge people across divides to help transform each other's lives. We revitalize neighborhoods in Detroit. And a big part of what we do is based on the reality that life is not equitable for all people. Certainly not for many, many people living in the city of Detroit who are African American, a city that's over 80% Black. And so we really want to have a space where we're going deep into transparent, vulnerable discussions. We're talking about race and politics. I'm going to hand it over to our Vice President, Juan Dandridge, to take it from here.
So what up, though, everybody? Glad to be able to have this conversation. I know that, we're living in some crazy times. We're dealing with pandemics, civil unrest, and in the midst of a presidential election, amongst other elections. So we thought it would be make sense for us to have a conversation with some folks that are passionate about all the things that I just mentioned, and have them to jump on and share some of their thoughts. So we're going to dive into a conversation about race and politics, and we have a few guests that some of you will know. And if you are at our Super Bowl event, you definitely will recognize a couple of faces from that event. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to allow them to introduce themselves, and like we do a 7-second introduction where you can, share whatever you can get about yourself, but make sure you announce your name, where you're from in the 7 seconds. And I would like to start with Christine, go Ellen, and then Eric, E.T., you bring it home for us. So go ahead, Christina.
Hey everybody, my name is Christina Karamo. I'm an adjunct faculty professor at Wayne County Community College. I'm a Christian apologist, and I host a podcast called It's Solid Foods.
Hi everyone, my name is Ellen Lipton, and I'm a former legislator in 6 years in the Michigan State House of Representatives, and I'm currently running as the Democratic nominee for the State Board of Education.
Is that me now?
That's you.
Oh boy, I'm Eric Thomas, Chief Storyteller for the City of Detroit is my current government title. Founder of an agency called Cwba, and I'm a brand strategist and a overzealous Facebook arguer, I guess. Happy to be here.
So we have Alan just jumped on just in time, Alan. So don't even mute yourself. Just in 7 to 10 seconds, tell our audience who you are.
Alan Hoover, former United States Marine Corps Gunnery Sergeant, 20 years, 5 deployments, combat support, former Republican congressional candidate, lost primary, and CEO of RPC2 Global, and chairman of the board, and also the executive producer for The Fifth Seat, where Christina Camaro and a couple other outstanding Michigan citizens are our hosts. And absolutely honored and a privilege to be here today. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you for joining us. Thank all of you for joining us. I am excited to dive into this conversation. I see some of the comments and the conversations that take place on social media. And I'm excited to be able to have a bunch of different perspectives and opinions on the subject, in one space where we can share. We have a wide range of people that support all the things that we do at Life Remodeled with various backgrounds. And we say we like to bridge people across those divides, as Chris was saying, to help transform each other's lives. And one way we do it is through dialogue. And, to set the stage, what I was sharing with Ellen when I spoke with her earlier, and even Alan, I think that Christina and Eric knows this about me. It's important for me that we bring the different voices and perspectives here, and that everybody that's here is respected. And I love respect and challenge. So if we can figure out the fine balance. So what we guarantee you guys is, we never guarantee comfort. We almost like to guarantee that you won't be comfortable, right? But we will guarantee you that we will respect your voice here, even if we don't agree with it. So without further ado, If you're watching, if you're viewing on either YouTube or Facebook, please take a moment to share, invite your friends. We want to get as many people in on this. We want to hear your comments. We want to have your questions here. So please join us and invite your friends to join us for the conversation. They won't want to miss it either. So I'm going to start the questions off going your way, Ellen. And the first question that I have for you is when you represented the 27th district, how would you address issues that were rooted in systemic racism, knowing that you had to represent the whole community?
Right. Yes, exactly. So what I tried to do is I never assumed that I knew the answer to a particular problem. So I would have a lot of coffee hours. I would go to school board meetings. I would go to schools, libraries, trying to meet people where they're at and basically try to get a sense of the problems that they were experiencing in the moment. And then I really tried to bring in my constituents as partners in problem solving. So instead of just having someone, write a letter, respond back with some pat response, I would really try to make sure that people had my cell phone, knew where I was going to be in the community, because issues are always coming up all the time. Because in my prior life, I was an attorney. I also looked at my role as a problem solver and as a convener of problems, and tried to work with my constituents in terms of, not just identifying the problem, but trying to think of, how we can collectively come together to solve it. Because I really feel like those types of changes are a little bit more long lasting than just me sort of, standing on high and saying, well, you should do this, or, what about this? That to me is not very, very long lasting. So that was sort of my approach.
Yeah, no, that's good. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. Christina, the next question is for you. And the first question I have for you is, why do you think that the large majority of Black people tend to vote Democrat?
Honestly, I think it's kind of by design. I think it's by design, because if you ask a lot or you say that I'm a conservative or I'm a Republican, or even, God forbid, you say I support President Trump, you get lambasted with a lot of insults and social isolation. Shame is a very powerful tool, and so is social isolation. So oftentimes when people have a conservative viewpoint, it's like you're not allowed to speak that viewpoint. So then what happens is people don't get to hear another perspective. And so you have many of the pastors, you have a lot of the teachers and the community leaders. And leaders are a good thing. All societies have leaders, but we somehow look for a Black voice, the voice for Black America. We're a bunch of different people. There is not one person who speaks for us all. So when we're kind of being corralled, if you will, and being told that you have to think this way, these are the people that you have to support. Then the leaders of the community, the pastors, a lot of times the teachers are teaching, because you're Black, you have to be a Democrat, where you're going to see that. And then when you have a voice such as mine, and I come and offer a conservative perspective, I'm a coon, I'm an Uncle Tom, I'm a bedwench, I'm all these other insulting terms that people don't really get to consider these other perspectives, because they instantly associate them with being a traitor. That's why Joe Biden felt comfortable saying during the 2012 election, if y'all vote for Mitt Romney, they gonna put y'all back in chains. I mean, that's such an ignorant statement. Or he said, like, if you don't vote for me, you ain't Black. He felt comfortable making those types of comments because it's been this perception that if you're a conservative and you're Black, you're a traitor to your people. And so a lot of times people don't even give an opportunity to hear our point of view. And actually, I think it's total political suicide to give your vote 95% of the time to one group of people, no matter what they do, without any consideration of the other perspective. They basically have no incentive to hear what you have to say or to care about your concerns. So it's totally crazy, but it's really by design. It's by design. Your voices aren't welcome. You can't come speak. You get disrespected. I mean, if you guys want any indication of how bad it is, I was at a prayer meeting a few months back, and the guy, he's Black, and was saying that he realized that he's a conservative. And he was having issues with his family, and he was asking for prayer because he was falling out with his family members. I've had people come to me and say, you know what, Christina, when I thought about it, I realized I'm actually a Republican. I've just been told since I was Black, I have to vote that way. So, I mean, people, of course, if that's you're philosophically liberal, then fair enough. You vote for your convictions. But don't tell me because I'm Black, I have to vote against my belief system because I'm Black, or otherwise I'm going to get put back in chains. That's fear-mongering. It's disrespectful because like 45% of Black people are actually conservative. So it's like you have whole swaths of voting against our own interests and then upset when the country isn't going the way we think it should. So that has a lot to do with it.
All right, that's good. You said a lot. I have like a couple follow-up questions based on what you said, but I definitely want to hear some of the other voices. So Eric Thomas, I'm going to send the same question your way. Why do you think the large majority of Black people tend to vote Democrat?
So, I mean, first of all, Black people are super conservative. I don't think the issue is being conservative or liberal. The issue is Democrats and Republicans. And being a Democrat or Republican, neither one of those means you're liberal or conservative, right? There are tons of conservative Democrats. Nancy Pelosi is way more conservative than me. Like, you know, she's damn near Republican. Like, what are you talking about? Like, so whenever I see that kind of stuff, I think it's a derailment. The Black community is incredibly conservative. We have been, which to me is always crazy. I don't understand how minorities can be conservative because to conserve means to say the same, and we were the same in slavery, right? Progressive movements create opportunities for people who historically or are historically disenfranchised, women, people of color, LGBTQ folks, etc. I think that people are historically Democratic because when the Dixiecrats, you know, like there's a lineage of this, right? Where, you know, there was a Republican movement to support Black people in the time of Lincoln that everybody likes to tout. But then when Black people started to get into place, right, people switched parties, right? Like it's documented fact that when Black people started to rise to leadership, we switched parties. And so now the places where there are densely packed urban cores tend to still historically vote Democratic because historically Democrats have spoken to the needs in disenfranchised communities. I think people are smart enough to know that trickle down doesn't work. I think people are smart enough to know that if you've taken things out of communities, the party speaking to adding services that add pillars around disenfranchisement as the party for you. If you are a low income community or a disenfranchised community and you vote for people that think that tax breaks for people making over $400,000 a year is the answer, then you have been brainwashed, right? You believe that you're a rich person in a cocoon, and eventually when you turn 45, you'll become mysteriously wealthy and that tax break is gonna work out for you. But as we know, the party's dead, straight to Christina. That's the fact. The parties didn't change, but the members of the parties did. And you can see that in history books. You can read that. But I think our real challenge is on both sides that people pop up. I think that most of these things pop up. Most parties, the Republicans and Democrats, show up 2 weeks before the election, ask Black people for their vote, and both kind of release them, you know, at the end of it on the other side. I don't think either party is free of that. The challenge that we have now is that we do only have two parties, and neither one of them is really working for us. Though I do believe that there are more people on the Democratic side that understand that social services combat systemic racism, and not sweeping history under the rug. So that's kind of where I stand on it.
Thanks for sharing that. Alan, I'd love to throw this next question your way. And it looks like Christina has lots of comments, and I think Robert had something that he wanted to share. We're going to get to some of those comments, y'all. I just wanted to give y'all a shout out and let y'all know that we see y'all and we see your comments. So keep them coming, please. Alan, so do you feel that the Republican Party is misunderstood when it comes to the Black community?
So, Dwan, whenever I get feeling-based questions, I always flip them over to a logic perspective, because feelings at the end of the day, it changes based on the person, right? But from a logical perspective, I believe it's more relatable when you approach it from that perspective. So I'm gonna take the feel piece and I'm gonna go with my thoughts on it. All right. So I think that the true issue here is fundamentally not about race or color or anything from that perspective, but from a global perspective, I think the true fundamental issue here is class warfare, and I mean a rich class, a middle class, and a lower class of poverty. And one way to create division and divisiveness is to take people in the middle class and create an atmosphere where they're at war with each other. And we see it in the 194 nations around the planet, in the third world countries. I've been to the Philippines, I've been to Malaysia, Indonesia, Burundi, Africa, my time in the military, all around the planet. And a lot of these countries that I saw and witnessed was an elite class and an extreme poverty class, a class living in shanties and a class living in mansions. So the American ideology, the American dream, this theory of Americanism, what makes us so different is our middle class. And in order for globalism to take root and destroy the United States of America, because we are the last stronghold, the United States of America is the last stronghold against a global one world government, in my perspective, in my opinion. And the last standing embodiment of that is the United States. So how do we destroy the United States? We have had historical figures in the past say the only way to destroy the United States if you do it internal. So how do you take a country like the United States that is protected by oceans on both sides, mountains, we have an endless amount of minerals and elements. We are completely self-sufficient. How do we create destruction internal to the U.S.? By creating division and divisiveness within our middle class, so that the middle class is not focused on what's actually transpiring. And this is where the race piece comes into play. Look, I grew up in River Rouge, Southwest Detroit, and predominantly grew up around people that did not look like me. But that did not affect the way that I perceive people. My perception has always been based on a person's actions and their thoughts, primarily their actions and their thoughts. So with that, I believe that we as American citizens have a civic duty. Now, whether or not we choose to act upon our civic duty, we still have a responsibility because we have freedom. And a lot of people, millions of people have died for us to have these freedoms. So if we don't enact on these civic duties and become involved in these parties where we're trying to put the Constitution first, then we're going to see these kind of fallbacks. So I think that this whole ideology of systemic racism or the separation of classes based on simply skin pigmentation, I think it is a tactical position that's being played by a greater authority to create division amongst us. That's what I think. So
you've shared a lot, and I have several questions on what you shared. I don't know if you answered the question. The question was, but we got to move on to Ellen because I want to hear other voices. So I do want to challenge everybody to I know that we're passionate about our positions on a bunch of different things, but I want to challenge you to challenge yourself to answer the question. The question was, do you feel the Republican Party is misunderstood when it comes to the black community? I don't know if anybody else got an answer from what you said, but I didn't. You know what I mean? So I want to challenge us to answer the questions and give commentary based on it. But I do want to kind of try to do that. So thanks for all you share. I'm gonna move on to Ellen on this one. I'll come back around to you. But Ellen, the question I have for you is, do you feel that the Democratic Party is guilty of taking the black vote for granted?
I do. I observed that when I was in the legislature. I saw that particularly in the area of school policy. That's sort of the area that I was very invested in when I was in the legislature. I served on the education policy and also the education funding committees. And I saw a lot of special interests pouring a lot of money into legislative races, particularly what I would call the charter school movement, particularly the for-profit charter schools, and others that really were pouring money, particularly into communities of color. And I found that to be very insulting because, the work that I did in Pontiac and Flint, in Detroit, particularly when the state was attempting to take these districts over, I spent a lot of time talking to the communities themselves and learning that that the Democratic Party, to the extent that they were embracing school choice, was not being at all sensitive to the fact that unfettered school choice has destroyed many communities of color in our state and elsewhere by destabilizing the public schools. So I did find that to be true. Yes, that the Democratic Party, particularly in as I said, in their education policies, were taking the Black vote for granted by not coming up with robust policies that were really addressing the needs of communities of color in the state.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. Christina,
Yeah.
my next question is to you.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say, do you believe that the Republican Party has better policies for Black people? I think I know the answer to that, but please share why.
Elaborate. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. To me, the Democratic philosophy of keeping Black people is as a permanent underclass because you can control them. I totally believe that. Absolutely. Because this whole concept that Black people need the government to hold their hand to survive is to suggest how somehow that we are incapable of being self-sufficient on our own. The permanent and the most important manner of freedom is economic freedom, not government dependency. Black people are totally capable of being independent. When you control my resources, my food, my housing, my medical care, I am totally beholden to you. And I'm going to do anything you tell me to do in order to make sure that my needs are met. The way of true liberation is independence and self-sufficiency. Like, for example, and people like to laugh, like President Trump's Platinum Plan. That is an excellent plan that tackles so many things. One of the big issues, like with the PPP loans that we saw as to why a lot of Black businesses did not receive those loans, was a lot of the documentation and a lot of the information that was needed to receive those fundings. A lot of Black businesses didn't have. One of the things that I know you guys, some of you may disagree with this. In some areas, I do think there's, like, especially with the prison system and the criminal justice system, I do believe that there is systemic racism in those particular spaces. But as a whole, I do not believe that there is systemic racism. I believe it's the legacy of racism that is harming Black people. It's like if I stab you with a knife and I pull out the knife. Okay, I may have pulled out the knife and the knife represents legislation, but guess what? You're still bleeding. You're still bleeding. And so therefore that bleeding is what I see going on in Black America. A lot of the issues that type of racism cause is what needs to be addressed and fixed, because that's why you have a massive wealth gap. And so the solution to the massive wealth gap is education. And I don't mean just K through 12 education. I mean actual information for people on how to, like a lot of Black businesses, they start, but they fail. A lot of that is because of a lot of information. How do I do this? How do I structure my business? How do I develop a business plan? Like the SBA, they have certain like quotas that they have to meet to make sure that Black businesses or women-owned businesses get access to certain funding. So there are resources there, but people have to know how to take advantage of them. And when someone said the legacy of racism asinine, that is not asinine. For example, if I have somebody who was like, we learn stuff from our family, right? We learn stuff from our family and our ancestors. And if your family were sharecroppers or slaves, or a lot of, like in my family, my great-great-grandfather was lynched in front of his entire family. So when people had a lot of those experiences, then over time, a lot of necessary information that should have gotten passed down doesn't get passed down because they don't have it. So it's a massive information gap. So I don't think it's some grand conspiracy to necessarily keep Black people down for the sake of we just hate Negroes. I think that there is a massive information gap because of those years of racism that Black people experienced, that it's like we're playing catch up. That's what's happening. Like I was reading an article that like 60% of wealth is really inherited from the family. And so when you have years where your people are behind, you're playing some catch up there. So that's what I'm trying to say. That's what I'm saying, is that there's a catch up that needs to be played there. And so those policies are designed in the Platinum Plan to help mitigate some of that gap by actual education and information leading to self-sufficiency, not government programs that keep us on the teeth where we're depending on them from food, housing, and medical care, because then you have a permanent underclass. It is turning Black people into a permanent underclass, and we feel like we cannot do anything with a benevolent white Democrat holding our hand. That is a massive problem. We can totally survive on our own, we can totally do what we need to do on our own if we get government out of our way. And again, that the plan, the design is to encourage self-sufficiency, to provide classes and education, and not just for Black people, but just for some struggling communities in general. The problem we see, kind of to what Alan mentioned, isn't so much to me of a race problem, it's a class problem. It's an economic problem. That's just, you have a higher percentage of people that are underclass who are Black. That's what I see going. So absolutely. And then also too, about abortion, that is a total problem. Like in Michigan, we count for 14% of the population, but we account for 50% of all abortions. 14% of the population to 50% of all abortions. We're basically being slaughtered. We're being slaughtered. So, I mean, that's why I'm pro-life. So to me, Republican policies are best for anybody struggling financially. Everything that's the ultimate problem we need to see, is that we work to encourage self-sufficiency and independence, and being independent in anybody, in any group or person that's suffering. That's the way we lift America up. Rising tides lift all ships. That's my philosophy.
Thanks, Christina.
50% of that, you sounded like a liberal, Christina. You sounded like us over here on this side. Go back into that talk you was talking.
So Eric, I got the same question for you. So a similar question. What do you say to Republicans? And I think you kind of got into this a little bit earlier. What do you say to Republicans that say that they were the party that freed the slaves?
Which one are you asking?
You.
Me?
Yes, you.
They were. But like, were is a past tense situation. I think this is really, I think, because this is what I thought that was really interesting watching the comments while Christina was talking. You saw people literally not even knowing exactly how to deal with it, because half of it really is a conversation about systemic racism and all this other kind of stuff. And the other, in the stuff that she believes about, that we're talking about self-sufficiency, I actually do agree with you on that. There are massive information gaps and resource gaps. When you say there's a class issue, Alan, I agree, as does Christina agree. I just happen to believe that a lot of the class issue is created by race. And so you can't decouple those two things. It's like burning the house down and then blaming the house for having been burned down. Like, no, dog, there was a fire. The problem was the fire. The reason why there's a class issue in this context is because of the racism. Now, back to this thing about Republicans who say they are the party of Lincoln, or their party that freed the slaves. Dog, that's like, congratulations for making your bed. Like, slavery wasn't cool. Like, you can't do a victory lap for getting rid of slavery. Like, good job. You're a human. You're a human being. But once again, and to this thing, what I was doing while everybody was talking was just getting online and scrolling through the History Channel and the government, United States government's website, looking at when the parties began to switch and all that kind of stuff, which I could probably drop in the comments section after the link. The cool thing about 2020 is some things you don't have to debate. There are facts, right? There is history. There was a situation with Strom Thurmond, but when he moved over, he took people with him, right? He didn't just run on his own. When you look at what was going on with Hoover, right? When Hoover was saying, I really don't want to do that Black stuff right now, right? That's documented stuff. When you look in the city of Detroit, in the Cwba Hall, thank God it was changed, Mayor Cwba ran on a keeping Black people out of Detroit platform. You know what I'm saying? Like, It is documented narrative that there are people who said it. And then you look at something like 375, where eminent domain was used to take the property of white people who own the buildings that black people were doing business in, because black people couldn't own the buildings. So to Christina's point, you can't pass down generational wealth if you're not allowed to pass it down, right? So once again, congrats. In the past, your party did some good stuff. Catch up.
So I think Alan comments almost kind of like sparked on some of the dialogue that we're having now. So I really appreciated that you brought class into the conversation, because that's a definitely important part. I think that my own thoughts would lean towards them being kind of intertwined in a way, because I think that some of the places that you pointed out have a different history and demographics than the U.S. But so kind of that leads to the next question is, so why do you think that we end up having so many conversations about race, like during the election season? I know that we have the conversation, but why do you think we have so many of them during the election time? So
with that, Dwan, I think it's like any other element, any other industry, any other atmospheric topic or entity that you're involved in. When a person doesn't have merits to run on, they flip to attacks. They go off of divisiveness. If my football team isn't good enough to win against yours, then I'm going to create some kind of atmosphere to attack yours, so that it somehow creates a mental perspective that puts me on the advantage. Like boxers say, a fight is 90% mental, 10% physical. All right. So if you don't have something worth merit to run on, like policies to make the country better, to increase equity, then you flip it to attacks. And that's what I believe is that we are perceiving here. And that also funnels back to the whole class warfare. And fundamentally, in order to destroy America, you have to have this total division internal to the people that make up our society, that make up our country. And it's class warfare is what it is. In major corporations, when you have a situation that results in someone getting injured or throughput, creating a product that is less par than what it was designed, they have teams come in to figure out what the root cause was, the root problem. What fundamentally caused this, right? Because at first glance, it seems like there's a lot of things. And it's just like this too. Well, it seems like there's a lot of things echoing around racism, especially around election time. But what is the root? What's the fundamental root? And I would argue that when a person doesn't have a good platform or things to run on, they pivot to creating division. And the best way to do it is through racism, because it sparks a lot of emotion and then it creates a massive distraction. Kind of like what was it called? Georgia Shuffle, is that what it was called? Where you get someone to look in one direction so that they don't see what's actually going on in the other direction. Similar to that. So I hope that this time I kind of answered the question. And if I may, I'd like to pivot a little bit too. This is the first time I've been on your show, so I don't really know what the rules are there. With the class warfare, though, I believe that equity is what we are missing out today in the United States. And that is because the platform, by and large, isn't being followed. The Republican platform mentions the word Constitution 79 times. I'm a Republican because the platform is so focused around the Constitution. And the Republican platform says, in quotations, we are the party of the Constitution. That's why I'm a Republican. If you read the Democratic Party's platform, the Constitution is barely mentioned in there. So I don't understand that. Like, my position is the government is not supposed to dictate and rule over us. The government is supposed to serve the people and secure and provide a nation. So when we see government entities, politicians getting elected and creating all these different programs, categorizing people such as Directive 15, and then coming out with all these different past avenues and ideologies for success, they're diminishing us as individuals. Like, take a seed and plant it in a box with a little bit of dirt and give it a little bit of water. It's only going to grow so big. But if you take that same seed and you put it in fertile soil with no boundaries, oh, it's endless, the potential, right? So anytime you have an institution framing what your constraints are, it's going to limit what it is that you're capable of becoming. And I think that that's what we're seeing happen, in addition to keeping equity from truly reaching its true potential by creating class division. So, yes, I believe that racism is brought into the conversation when someone doesn't have their own individual merits and ideologies. Because if I can't get you motivated to follow me based on how I want to make life better, well, I guess I can get you riled up by making you angry. That's like my thought perspective there. Not me personally, but I think that's their perspective.
All right. Thanks for sharing that. And just so you guys know, we're going to switch it up a little bit and allow each of the guests to ask a question to one of the other guests if you guys desire to do that. So I thought that would be fun. I'm sure that you guys probably have some things based on what you're hearing that you want to like dive a little bit or unpack, have somebody unpack.
Mike, can I go first? Can I go first?
No. You can't go first. We're gonna keep it in the same rotation, in the same order. But somebody can yield their time to you if they want to. They yield their question to you if they want to. So Ellen, it's on you. And there's a question that Chris had that I thought like would be really good to work in. And after I ask this next round of questions, we'll start with that and then open it up to where you guys can share your questions with one another. So Ellen, so you talked a little bit about like some of the things that you saw when you were in office. So what is it? Can you kind of summarize or share with us in a way that those of us that haven't held seats in office could kind of understand, you seeing it from the outside and from the inside? Like, what do you think the Democratic Party can do to address some specific issues as it pertains to the Black community?
I think for me, that is why I became so invested in the issue of education. To me, when I was serving, the contrast between the parties could not have been more stark. I served at a time when we were coming out of the Great Recession. We had seen cuts to education that began under Governor Engler, tremendous cuts. And when Governor Snyder came in, one of his first acts was to eliminate a business tax, which the business community had lobbied very hard for. It created a $350 million hole in the budget, and he plugged that hole by cutting $350 million out of the school aid fund in one fell swoop. I was there on the appropriations committee when this governor made the most significant cuts to the school aid fund that the state had ever seen. And to expect anything other than what happened, which was school districts falling into chaos, was incredibly naive. The Republicans then answered that with a state takeover district, which they modeled in Detroit, called the Educational Achievement Authority, which I ended up having to use my own dollars to do a FOIA request, because as a sitting legislator, when I asked the questions of the chancellor that Governor Snyder had appointed over these 15 schools, what was going on with special ed students, they refused to answer me. So I said, fine, I'm an attorney, I will FOIA you. And what I learned made my skin crawl. I put those documents up on a public website so the world could see. And again, the contrast between the parties could not have been any clearer to me. The Republican response to defunding our schools was for the state to come in and take them over and deliver a subpar form of education to students, which I personally witnessed. Special ed students wandering the hallways without any support, students learning on a program that was a beta test of a program that had been developed by the state treasurer's brother out of Utah. And that angered me. But to further drill down on the issue of parties' priorities, and again, I'm speaking at the state level in the area of education, which I think is very, very important. A lot of my Republican colleagues were very, very upset by what I showed them was happening in education, but their response to me was, "Well, what's your idea? You know, I mean, we have to follow the governor's idea. What's your idea?" And I took that very, very seriously. And so I spent the next year of my life putting together our democratic response to the issue of education. And I'm happy to say that although not all of those plans have been implemented, I can, hope to continue to work on the issue of equitable funding, community-based turnaround plans, and things of that nature. So just to answer your question, the way in which the two parties have come at the issue of education at this current moment, and particularly at what we're seeing at the federal level in terms of the policies that Betsy DeVos is putting forward, it could not be more clear in my mind that the Republican approach to education is simply wrong and destructive, and we can't double down on that any longer.
Okay. All right, I got a next question for Christina, but I do have challenge for Ellen as well. I think you spent a lot, and I think that this is what we see in the conference when he said we have these conversations a lot. The question was to be consistent with, my challenge to Alan. The question was, what do you think the Democratic Party can do to address the specific issue of the Black community? And I think you answered a question that was more about like what Republicans did or didn't do than like what the Democrats could do. At least that's what I heard, right? So again, like, I guess I'm challenging myself and us all at the same time, because I think it's important that we can have dialogue, that can issue challenge and results and things that we can kind of put in place on a personal level, and then we can get to the place where we're actually doing some stuff collectively. But thank you for that, because I did hear where you talked about what you did specifically when you took the question that they posed to you and you went back and wrestled with it and took it very seriously. I did hear that as well. Christina.
Yeah.
I'd love to ask if everyone could limit their answer to about 20 seconds so we can get to multiple questions as
Christina,
well too.
Yes.
Your thoughts on Ice Cube's strategy regarding CWBA?
His strategy as far as him reaching out to both campaigns, or the strategy itself?
Yes.
I think that him reaching out to both campaigns was beautiful. Me and my Republican friends, we were like, yes, this was the October surprise we've been waiting on. and I say that because it's strategically asinine to 95%. So we're only going to talk to this one party. We saw how Van Jones got treated when he worked with Jared Kushner for the First Step Act. Like, oh, you don't talk to the Trump administration. That's dumb. If they're in power and they're willing to work with you to solve a problem, why wouldn't you? So I love the fact he just said it plainly. He reached out to both campaigns. The Trump campaign made adjustments to their platinum plan. The Biden campaign said we talked to you after the election. And I think that reveals what we've been talking about forever, is that they take the Black community for granted, and they rather have a permanent underclass because they can lock down the vote than actually deal with some of these issues so we can have more Black self-sufficiency. So I thought the strategy was great. We loved it.
Thanks. E.T., same question to you. What are your thoughts about Ice Cube's strategy?
I think, as I look through it, it looks like just statements, right? And this is just general, right? I hate this on both sides. I hate when politicians refer to themselves as job creators or say they're going to make X number of jobs or start X number of businesses, because they're not. You know what I'm saying? Like, as an entrepreneur, I was an entrepreneur for 10 years. I hired all my own people. They didn't. No one created my jobs. The only thing that creates jobs is demand. The only thing that creates demand is, liquidity, right? The ability for people to purchase products and grow. I think the stock market is a trash indicator of how good the economy is doing, right? We've got the highest unemployment in decades. But I think the plan is a sound litany of statements about what people would like to have. I don't think it's a plan. And I think that's where I come in at. I think it's nice statements. I would have rather seen, 10 bullet points with some how we're going to do that than like 55 things that would be great. Yeah, we could create 500,000 black businesses and hire blah, 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 and give everybody a couple $100,000. And then here's where we get weird as hell. There's this conversation on one side that mentioning race at all is racist, which I think is bananas, right? Like, we're not saying that mentioning race is racist is bad. We're saying that being like holding people down because of their race is bad. Talking about what happened to people because of their race, that's just the reality of what's going on. Same way with saying this happened to women because they were women and they didn't get the access because men didn't give it to them, right? But how do you push that initiative and then cut out equity programming and all that stuff, and then simultaneously drop the platinum plan that has all this black language? I would like to know from the Republicans how they're reconciling that, where we're screaming about how the Biden campaign or whoever else is mentioning race, but the platinum plan is mentioning race all through it, right? It's just black people this, black people this, black people this, black people this. Are you okay with us talking about race or no? I don't understand. I don't understand where you stand. That's my question.
All right. Thanks. Yeah. So, Chris, the question that you threw out, I think we can pick up with Alan there. Can you pose that question real quick, and we can kind of go around and get people's thoughts on it?
Yep. I'll preface it. This is me speaking as a private citizen, not the CEO of Life or Model. So, I'm not a Democrat. I'm not a Republican. I already voted. I didn't vote for Donald Trump. I have a lot of friends who did and will, who I dearly love. Is it possible, and really I want to ask Eric and Ellen this first, is it possible for an American to be anti-racist and vote for President Donald Trump in the 2020 election?
Ellen, your mic is muted.
Eric,
so unmute yourself, and we go to you first.
Someone to be anti-racist and vote for Donald Trump. I would have to say, I don't know. To me, the things that he has done in his personal and public life suggest to me that I don't know how you could reconcile that. I would struggle with someone who's really looked into their heart and truly believes themselves to do everything they possibly can to be anti-racist, but then cast a vote for him. That would trouble me. Yeah.
Eric, have you ever met anyone who is going to vote for Trump who is anti-racist as well?
Here's the thing, man. I don't think Christina is pro-racism, right? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, I don't believe that, right? And I know some people that are against racism that are voting for Donald Trump. Here's where I stand on it. I think we're giving the man too much damn credit. I don't think that Donald Trump invented racism. I don't think Donald Trump is the most racist president ever, because some of our presidents owned people. You know what I'm saying? Like I don't think, and now this is where I get in trouble. I don't think Donald Trump is more racist than George Washington. I don't think that's true. I think if a black person would have came through the front door and sat at George Washington's table and started eating food off his table, he would have had a conniption fit. JFK uninvited Sammy Davis Jr. from the inaugural ball because he was married to a white woman. JFK did. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's more black people hanging out with Trump than JFK, and that's the one we like. Okay, so this is like, Donald Trump did not make up racism, right? I think if you look at his father, if you look at his, unequal and racist housing policies, if you look at him pulling out an entire ad in the New York Times about about killing some black folks, I think he has a history of classism, of tying classism to race, of tying classism to identity. I think if you support him, you're putting your head in the sand and not realizing not only what he's doing, but also the type of ideology he empowers. Donald Trump isn't the scariest part about Donald Trump. QAnon is, right? Like QAnon is scarier than Trump, but QAnon is empowered by Trump, right? And so you got to start asking, like literally he goes on news and says, I've never heard of them, but I hear they're against pedophilia. Well, then did you hear of them or not? Right? The question becomes, what are you putting into the universe, and what does your existence create the fertile ground for? And so that is kind of where I stand on that scenario. I don't think you can not be anti-racist. I just think that you are not only supporting somebody that makes racists feel safe, that you're supporting somebody that will be more emboldened the second time around, which is terrifying to me.
So Alan, to you coming behind that, like, should the Republican Party address the fact that many people of color feel like there is blatant racism, and many people that aren't don't identify as people of color feel like there's blatant racism present within the party, especially with Donald Trump leading the way?
So people feeling like there's racism existing within the Republican Party.
Yeah.
Yes,
so do you think that the Republicans should address it, or just ignore it as not an issue?
No, right. So I believe that they should address it, because it is a thing. People do feel that way. People do think that way. And regardless of whether or not it's true, it needs to be addressed because people think that way. People feel that way. So if there is something that everyone has a view on this, and if the position is that the view is incorrect, it's an incorrect view, then it needs to be addressed. It needs to be explained so everybody's perception is changed, right? Everybody needs to be educated on the subject. And unfortunately, we do have racism today. It's not as abundant as it was in the past, but it does exist in different factions and different packets. And I would argue that it's within multiple areas within the United States. And I believe that it needs to be addressed. I don't think that it is systemic and wide-based. I don't think that it's massive. I think this is a minority amount of people, meaning the lesser amount of people that have these perspectives. But nonetheless, I do think that it's there. And I think it's a smaller amount of people. But primarily, I divert back to what I've been saying from the beginning, Dwan, that this is ultimately about class warfare and creating division amongst us here. And I being a Republican, my core position on being a Republican defaults back to the Constitution. And I don't recall in the Constitution it identifying people by race. I don't recall that in there. I recall the Constitution.
Follow-up question to that I'm sure some people are watching want to hear ask. So, like, you realize that, like, I'm trying to make sure I'm not asking this in an insulting way or a dismissive way. So, like, you're using the same Constitution that existed, though we have some amendments and some adjustments to it. You're using the same Constitution that was in place when slavery was legal, when killing black people was legal, right? To be illegal to kill black people now is kind of like a newer law in the history of the country.
So yes,
how do you reconcile that?
I'm using the same Constitution. Oh, there went Sergio. I'm using the same Constitution from
that's a sign.
That's a sign. 1800s to current. It's the same Constitution where all people were created and empowered by God. Yeah. And just because people didn't follow the Constitution doesn't mean that the Constitution was wrong. The document is impeccable. It wasn't followed back then, arguably because of class warfare. And yes, slaves were predominantly black, but there were also white Irish slaves predominantly too. And they were put into the same place. They were brought over, sold into slavery, and utilized on the tobacco and cotton fields. It's in the history books. I wasn't alive back then, but I have to go off of what's wrote in the history books. But to answer your question, the Constitution is what led to slavery being abolished, because the Republican Party came into existence and said, hey, Democrats, slavery is unconstitutional. We have to change it. We have to stop it. So the Republican Party was the first party to start enforcing what was actually in the Constitution. That was my position. That's what I would argue. And to the comments that we're hearing about people voting for President Trump and not being anti-racism, I don't understand why this is surrounding President Trump, because we have seen more prosperity in communities that have larger classes of minorities. Since we're talking race, we have seen an increase in income, an increase in employment, despite the efforts on COVID-19, which I'm not going to go in there. It's a whole nother conversation. And I don't see issues or situations where President Trump has been racist. So I would challenge these people here to say, don't tell me President Trump's done multiple racist things. Tell me the exact specific thing that he's done. I wanted specific examples, because I don't see it. I see the man putting things into play that allow people from Black communities to create more lucrative businesses, to empower themselves, and additionally with the skilled trades. Look at the USMCA compared to NAFTA. I would argue that the Clintons with Newt Gingrich destroyed more middle class jobs when they sent all of our industry to other countries, versus USMCA, which was put in place by President Trump, which brought 200,000 plus companies back into, or 200,000 jobs back into the United States.
Right, let me let some other people jump in, Alan. So sounds like you posed a question. So I'd love for that to be the first question. So let's go to Christina and Eric with that question, where you said, like, so Christina, the question that I heard Alan ask is like, so is Donald Trump racist? Can you give pinpoint some spaces where he has displayed racism? So that question will go towards you, even as a Republican, because I think that you're pretty, as balanced as they come. You know what I mean? When it comes to like position being rooted in evidence. So question to you: what has Donald Trump done that you could identify as him being racist?
I don't think he has. And let me give a perfect example. People said he called himself a white nationalist. He called himself a nationalist. He specifically said, I'm not a globalist, I'm a nationalist. And people literally took that comment out of context to create the narrative that he's a white nationalist. I'm a nationalist, not a globalist. And he said a globalist to draw a contrast between this idea of building a global government, because there is a move to build globalism through Marxism. It totally is. But people lied on him. And then when the very fine people comment, he literally said there were people that were unfairly lumped in with the Nazis. He also literally said, I condemn white supremacists, neo-Nazis, the KKK, totally. He's like, I'm not talking about them. So even if we think people were wrong for marching for the statue, that's fine. But to say that everybody supporting that Virginia or Charlottesville rally was a white supremacist is just not accurate. So it is accurate to say there were good and bad people on both sides, because Antifa, they were literally there in black, beating people up. And Joe Biden likes to say, oh, Antifa doesn't exist. It's an idea. Milo Yiannopoulos, UC Berkeley, Antifa was out there waving communist flags, beating people up. They are not an idea. They're an actual organization. So many of the things that they accused him of saying that are racist, like the big one, he refused to condemn white supremacy at the debate. That is a lie. Chris Wallace asked him that question for a second time. He said, tonight, sir, like he never done it before. He's done it a bunch of times. And if you listen to a bunch of his speeches, he condemns racism in his speeches. At his rallies, at his Trump rallies, he said, all races, all people, all creature, all children made in the image of God, which is a Christian ethos, by the way. He literally, Chris Wallace said, sir, are you going to condemn racism? The first thing that came out of his mouth was, sure. Look at the transcript. You guys, all the people in the comments can call me light and call me whatever they want. Look at the transcript. The first word that came out of his mouth was sure. Now, sure. All
right. I'm gonna let
he said, do you condemn racism? He said, sure.
Maybe.
No, what's wrong with sure?
So Christina,
No,
Like-
nobody can provide any evidence. What did he do that was
Christina
racist?
and everybody else watching, like, it's taking everything within me to not like share my thoughts and perspective on that. But what I will do is like invite like Eric Thomas to share his thoughts and his perspective on that. And we're running upon like our hour time max, so we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. After this, I'll invite Chris to share any thoughts, and I'll wrap us up. But Eric Thomas, question to you: what has Trump done specifically that would identify him as a racist?
Fortunately, we got receipts. So you can of course look at the newspaper and the New York Times calling for the death penalty for young men of color. But let's keep it going, right? So I just wanted to pull up a joint and just kind of go point by point. The first one, of course, is even the Nixon administration sued Trump Management Corporation for fair housing because they refused to rent to black tenants. We got 1980, where, let's see, former employee at Trump's castle accused another Trump business discrimination. When Donald Trump and Ivana came to the casino, the bosses would order all the black people off the floor. Let's see, we've got, we could just keep scrolling. Trump Plaza Hotel and Casino had to pay a $200,000 fine because it transferred black and women dealers off tables to accommodate a big time gambler's prejudice. It's all through his management system, right? In that, like I said, is what worries me so much about Donald Trump. He's the type of person who can just say, hey, y'all, do the bad stuff that I'm clearly about, because that's what they're doing. They're appeasing the leadership. And of course, him calling, African countries shithole countries and et cetera, et cetera. I know. We're just talking about the other shithole countries, that is not racist. It's just all the brown ones. It's just saying, I guess
He didn't say that.
some of the Mexicans are fine people, I guess, but most of them are rapists, I guess. The problem, like I said, the thing about Donald Trump, and this is really interesting to me as a communicator, Donald Trump is a funny ass dude, right? He's funny. He's a comedian or almost. But his comedy is a little guttural for a guy who's running the country, and for somebody where people take his word as gospel. And so what is happening is, though he does have a fairly dark sense of humor, I do think he holds some really messed up ideologies. I think he is he's different than Louis C.K. because Louis C.K. won't go out in the street and fight for him. Of course, it's not what he said. Just multiple people said he said it. The thing about Donald Trump is he has an incredible amount of influence. And he's too gentle on the people that are inspired by the rhetoric, right? Like the Proud Boys. To tell the Proud Boys to, just chill for 1 minute, stand back and wait and see, basically. That's a whole white supremacist group.
No.
They were created by a black guy from Canada.
Okay, it was not. It was created by old dude who's a co-founder of Vice. He was the leader of that organization and has incredibly white nationalist ideology.
No, their group is against racism. It's in their platform.
Right, because you know who's against racism now too? The KKK. It's right in their lines.
Their leader is Afro-Cuban. Their current leader is Afro-Cuban.
Great. What you talking about the one guy that's part of one branch?
No, he's their current chair. Their current national chair is Afro-Cuban. And if you read their website, it says they're against racism multiple times. And I've seen interviews before the accusation where they said they're against racism. They have black members, they have Latino members, they have members of all ethnicities. The KKK, to my knowledge, never had a black member.
The Ku Klux Klan has an anti-racist policy now, right?
Oh, please. No, they don't.
It does.
The KKK.
I didn't name it.
I never heard that. That's new.
Of course it's new, because all of these people have decided that they're anti-racist all of a sudden, except for their deeply, deeply held racist ideologies.
Yeah. So Eric, you did say one thing though that I'd like to comment on.
Cool.
That's with the comments on Mexico and Mexicans and the alleged racist comments there. Look, I just want to highlight that the cartels in Mexico, the Los Zetos and all of them, they are so dangerous. They are so dangerous that we have hundreds of millions of dollars of our tax dollars invested into ICE, Homeland Security, Border Patrol, and our military to keep them from destroying our country. These organizations, these cartels, they will chop up a child. They will chop up a human being, a mother, a woman, a child, a father. They murdered over 27 teachers 2 years ago and mass buried them. The cartels is something that you cannot play with. You can't play with. And my perception on what he was saying was going exactly towards them, as well as MS-13, which is another massively brutal game.
These
are like the vice lords that were doing community outreach centers in Chicago.
What's the population of Mexico? It's 126 million people in Mexico. So yeah, 317. It's not it's 200,000 people at max. There's 126 million people there.
So we're gonna wrap it up on that. I will say this, right? I think that we did an awesome job of respecting each other's perspective and voice, right? And obviously, like, these are some really like passionate issues that you can't help but be passionate about. As we saw in the comment section starting out, what we are looking to try to do is continue to bridge across gaps. And I really appreciate the moments. I'm gonna go back and watch this and kind of highlight some of the moments where there was some spaces where we agreed with each other. Because I think that ultimately we all want to see us do well. And by us means, like, hopefully everybody. I mean, I know that there's so many different ways that we create our own little section, right? Like, we've heard us say black, we've heard us say white, we've heard us say American, we heard us say global, as if, you know, like, I think that we could do a justice to all mankind if we can find that spot where we're doing that thing, right? Where we're doing the thing, or that's the equivalent of being against the other. We do that by location, we do that by gender, we do that in a bunch of different ways. Right now, as we've seen throughout the history of this nation, race has been at the forefront of that. And that's the reason we see it necessary to have these conversations here at Life Remodeled. We're just trying to play our part. We understand that we don't want to move this punt down the field, or punt this issue. As difficult as it is, we don't want to leave the next generation with the same thing that we inherited. It's going to take somebody brave enough, bold enough to come on here and have this conversation like our guest did today. So on behalf of our staff, I thank you all for joining us and being a part and sharing your perspective. All of you that watched and shared comments, I thank y'all for joining us. There's a lot to do. As I always say, you're not going to solve these problems in a 1 hour and 7 minute conversation. But you can start the journey yourself and try to walk alongside of one another to bring about the improvement. So with that being said, we're out. See you next time. Peace.
Peace. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Thanks for having me on, you guys. God bless you guys.